The moment I stepped into my new apartment, something felt off. At first, I chalked it up to nerves. After all, this was my first time living alone. No roommates, no family, just me in a cozy little one-bedroom in an older building on the quieter side of town. It was supposed to be exciting, my first real taste of independence. But from the very first night, there was this feeling, like a weight pressing down on my chest. It wasn't anything obvious, no flickering lights, no eerie whispers, no doors slamming shut on their own. Just a quiet, creeping sense of unease that settled in my bones. The kind that made the hair on the back of my neck prickle for no reason. The kind that made me hesitate before stepping into a dark room, glancing over my shoulder even when I knew, logically, that no one was there. I told myself it was just me getting used to the space. Living alone meant every creak and groan of the building felt louder, more noticeable. But as the days passed, that unease didn't fade. It grew. I started waking up in the middle of the night, heart hammering, with no idea why. The apartment would be silent, nothing out of place, but my instincts would be screaming that something wasn't right. It was a strange kind of paranoia, like I was being watched, but by what, I couldn't say. Then, I started noticing the little things. I'd come home from work and find my closet door slightly ajar, even though I knew I had shut it. My keys would be in a different spot than where I'd left them. My coffee mug, one I always kept on the right side of the counter, would sometimes be on the left. At first, I thought I was just being forgetful. Maybe I was distracted, not paying attention to where I put things. But then the noises started. Soft, almost imperceptible sounds in the dead of night. A faint shuffling coming from somewhere inside the apartment. A floorboard creaking like someone had stepped on it, except I wasn't moving. I told myself it was just the building settling. Just the old pipes. Just my imagination. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. And then, one night, I found the door. It happened on a quiet Sunday evening. I had spent the entire day reorganizing my apartment, scrubbing the floors, wiping down the counters, anything to keep my mind occupied. The unease that had settled over me since moving in wasn't going away, and I thought maybe if I took control of my space, if I owned it, I could shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. By the time I reached my closet, I was exhausted. I hadn't touched the boxes piled in the corner since move-in day, so I figured it was finally time to go through them. Most were filled with old books, winter clothes, and random junk I had forgotten I owned. But as I started shoving them against the back wall, something caught my eye. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the lighting. The wall behind the boxes looked different. The color was off, not by much, but enough that it stood out once I noticed it. The paint was a shade too smooth, too even compared to the rest of the slightly worn apartment walls. I frowned and reached out, running my fingers over the surface. That's when I felt it. A thin, almost imperceptible seam. A chill rippled through me. I traced the edges with my fingertips, my movements slow and deliberate. The seam wasn't jagged like cracked paint, it was straight, clean, precise. My breath caught in my throat. I stepped back, my mind racing. Was this a door? My first instinct was to dismiss the idea. Maybe it was just a poorly patched section of drywall, some lazy repair job from the previous tenant. But as I kept running my hands along the edges, my stomach tightened. The more I examined it, the clearer it became. This was a door. A narrow, hidden door, painted over to blend perfectly with the wall. Someone had gone out of their way to conceal it. I swallowed hard. Why? For a long moment, I just stood there, staring at it, debating whether I really wanted to know what was behind it. There was a reason it had been hidden. A reason no one had mentioned it. I should have left it alone. But I couldn't. My fingers pressed against the surface, searching, feeling. There was no handle. No knob. Just that barely there gap where the door met the frame. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to think rationally. Maybe it was a storage space. Maybe it was just part of the building structure, nothing more. Then, click. The sound was soft, almost inaudible, but I felt it. A tiny shift, the barest release of tension under my fingertips. My pulse spiked. The door moved. Not much, just an inch. Enough for a sliver of darkness to spill through. I took a step back, my skin crawling. A rush of cold air swept out from the gap, carrying the stale scent of dust and something older, something damp. I reached for my phone with shaking hands, fumbling to turn on the flashlight. I hesitated. Beyond the narrow opening, there was no shelving. No drywall. Just pure, empty blackness. A passage. And then I saw them. Scattered footprints in the dust. Not old, faded ones. Fresh ones. Leading from my apartment and vanishing into the darkness beyond. I stood frozen, the beam of my phone's flashlight trembling in my grip as it illuminated the narrow passageway. My breath was coming in shallow, uneven gasps, my body refusing to move even as my mind screamed at me to do something. Close the door. Run. Call someone. But I didn't. Instead, I took a slow step forward. The footprints in the dust weren't ancient relics of past tenants. They weren't some forgotten trace of the building's history. They were fresh. And they were leading out of the darkness. Someone had been in there. Recently. My stomach twisted. Every instinct I had told me to shut the door and pretend I never found it, but a morbid, gnawing curiosity kept me standing there, peering deeper inside. My light barely penetrated the darkness, revealing only rough, unfinished wooden walls and a narrow corridor that stretched far beyond what I expected. This wasn't some small crawl space. It was a hallway. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Why was this here? The landlord never mentioned a hidden passage. It wasn't in the floor plan. Was this some kind of forgotten maintenance tunnel? An old storage access? Then I noticed something else. The dust wasn't just disturbed by footprints. There were smudges on the walls, faint streaks where something, or someone, had brushed against the wood. As if whoever had been in there had been moving carefully, pressing themselves to the sides. Trying not to be heard. My throat felt tight. I took another step forward, the floor creaking beneath me. The sound echoed down the passage, too loud, making my chest tighten. I expected to hear silence in return. Instead, I heard another creak. Soft. Muffled. But definitely not mine. I froze. I wasn't alone. My fingers went numb around my phone as my flashlight flickered, the weak beam struggling against the darkness. I aimed it farther down the corridor, but the light only stretched so far. The passage kept going, far deeper than I had imagined. Then, just for a fraction of a second, something moved. It was subtle. A shift in the darkness, barely distinguishable from the shadows themselves. A shape, low to the ground. I sucked in a sharp breath, my heart hammering against my ribs. Was it an animal? A rat? No. Too big. Something inside me snapped. That was enough. More than enough. My body finally listened to my instincts, and I took a shaky step back, then another, fumbling to grab the edge of the hidden door. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped my phone, but I didn't stop. As I started pulling the door closed, I swear to God, I heard breathing. Not mine. Slow. Shallow. From inside the passage. My hands clenched the edge of the door, yanking it shut in one frantic motion. The moment it clicked back into place, I stumbled backward, pressing my back against the opposite wall, gasping for air. Silence. I stood there for what felt like hours, barely daring to breathe, my ears straining for any sound. Nothing. But I knew I wasn't imagining it. Something was in there. And the worst part? It had been in my apartment before. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I lay in bed, the blankets pulled up to my chin, every muscle in my body stiff with tension. I kept my phone clutched in my hands, the flashlight still on, pointed toward my closet. The door was shut, locked, but that didn't matter. I knew what was behind it now. I wasn't alone in this apartment. Sometime around 4 a.m., my exhaustion started to outweigh my fear. My eyes grew heavy, my body sinking deeper into the mattress. I fought it, but eventually, sleep pulled me under. Then, I woke up to a sound. A soft, deliberate creak. The closet door. My entire body turned to ice. I didn't move, didn't even breathe, just stared at the darkness where my closet stood. My phone was still in my grip, but the flashlight had dimmed, the battery nearly dead. Had I imagined it? I stayed there, heart hammering so hard it hurt. Minutes passed. Then an hour. I heard nothing else. The apartment was silent. When the first light of dawn seeped through my window, I forced myself to move. I didn't check the closet. I didn't check the hidden door. I just grabbed my bag and left. I drove straight to my landlord's office. I hadn't planned what I was going to say, but I didn't care. Someone had been inside my apartment. I had proof. The receptionist at the front desk barely looked up as I walked in. "I need to speak to the landlord," I said, my voice tight. She sighed, popping her gum. "He's busy." "I don't care," I snapped. "It's an emergency." That got her attention. She rolled her eyes but pointed toward the back office. "Knock first." I didn't. I shoved the door open and walked straight in. The landlord, a balding man in his 60s, looked up from his desk, startled. Miss Evans, right? What's the problem?" I dropped into the chair across from him, my pulse still racing. "There's a hidden passage in my apartment." His expression barely flickered. Don't even try," I cut him off. "I found the door. It opens. And someone has been using it." That got him. For the first time, I saw something flicker across his face. A hesitation. A tiny, almost imperceptible crack in his carefully neutral expression. "I need you to tell me what's going on," I pressed, leaning forward. "Because I'm not staying in that apartment another night." The landlord exhaled slowly, rubbing his temple. Then, he said something that made my stomach drop. "That apartment has a history." I gripped the arms of my chair. "What kind of history?" He hesitated. Then, "It used to be part of a boarding house, decades ago. The passageways were built so the staff could move between rooms without disturbing the tenants." I swallowed hard. "And you never thought to mention that?" He sighed. "They were all supposed to be sealed off. The renovations were done years ago." "They weren't." My voice was shaking. "And I'm telling you right now, someone has been inside." I expected him to deny it, to dismiss me. But instead, he leaned back in his chair and said, quietly, "You should move out." The room tilted. I blinked at him, certain I had misheard. What? He didn't meet my eyes. It's probably just a squatter. Or something else. Either way, if you're smart, you won't go looking for answers. I felt sick. I pushed back from the desk, standing on shaky legs. I want out of my lease. The landlord exhaled through his nose, then nodded. Fine. You can break it. No penalty. I was out of the building 5 minutes later. But I had one last night in that apartment before I could leave for good. And I had a terrible feeling it wasn't going to be quiet. I should have left right then and there. I should have gone straight to a motel, crashed on a friend's couch anywhere but that apartment. But I told myself I just needed one last night. One last night to pack my things, to leave this place behind, to pretend none of this ever happened. I spent the entire day out, lingering in coffee shops, driving around aimlessly, avoiding going home for as long as possible. Every time I thought about stepping back inside that apartment, my skin crawled. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, I knew I couldn't put it off any longer. I arrived back at my building just after 10 p.m. The moment I stepped inside, the air felt heavier. The silence felt different. I left the hallway lights on. I locked the front door twice. Then, as a final precaution, I shoved a chair under the handle. If someone tried to get in, I'd hear it. I forced myself to breathe. Just pack. Just a few hours. Then you're gone. But as I moved through the apartment, stuffing my clothes into a suitcase, a deep, gnawing feeling settled in my gut. I wasn't alone. I had barely dozed off when I woke up to the sound of movement. A slow, deliberate creak. The closet door. My entire body turned to ice. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. The room was dark, but I could feel it, something shifting. A presence. A weight in the air that hadn't been there before. My phone was still in my grip, and with the lightest movement possible, I turned the flashlight on, aiming it straight at the closet. The hidden door was open. Wide open. A gaping black void where there should have been solid wall. And then, in the dim glow of my flashlight, I saw it. A hand. Pale. Too long. Resting against the inside of the doorway. The breath left my lungs in a sharp, panicked gasp. The second I made a sound, the hand withdrew fast. A sudden, jerky movement, disappearing into the darkness like it hadn't expected to be seen. I moved. I grabbed my keys. My wallet. My suitcase, screw the rest of my things. I didn't stop to look back. Didn't try to close the door. I ran. I yanked the chair away from the front door, ripped it open, and sprinted down the hall, my bare feet slamming against the cold floor. The moment I hit the stairwell, I was sobbing. My chest was tight, my breath shallow, my entire body shaking so badly I almost collapsed. I didn't stop running until I was in my car, my hands fumbling to shove the key into the ignition. I looked up, one last time, at the window of my apartment. And I swear I saw something standing there. Watching. I never went back. I never told anyone the full truth, I barely believed it myself. I had no proof. No police report. Just a broken lease and a trauma that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. A week later, I drove past the building, just once. My apartment window was dark. Someone new had already moved in. I wondered how long it would take them to notice. How long it would take before they felt that same, unshakable feeling that someone was always watching. Because they were. They still are. And I pray to God they never open that door.